School District Board of Education, regular meeting, Monday, October 27th. We will start with a moment of silence and Pledge of Allegiance, please. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on our agenda, items of interest, recognition, and inquiry. Board of Education members have anything? Mr. Folsom?
Alan, you want to go first?
I have a question of clarification on the bond issue. A couple of things that, or a couple of rumors that have been going around that I wanted clarification for. That with regards to privatization, and some people have been saying that the radius of the walking radius is going to be reduced, and which I assume is untrue, but I don't know for sure. But things have been said from Mr. McNamee, Mrs. Frank, Mr. Buer, and Dr. Skalka, so I wanted to know what exactly the promise is if the bond passes. Like, is that we're not going to privatize, or what exactly is?
I will be addressing all of that in the agenda and the report that talks about, let's see if we can see it on there, Superintendent's Report Ballot Proposal Update. So I plan on hitting all those. Can we do it then?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And one last item that I wanted to bring up, a positive thing. I wanted to thank the bus drivers for, earlier this month they put on Stuff a Bus for, I believe it was the 3rd or 4th year in a row, and they have been an integral part of our community. They have done an excellent job, and I've been to 3 of them. This year I wasn't able to, but I think that they've done an excellent job, and it shows how much they care about our community, and not just when they're on the clock, but also when they're off the clock. They serve the community, so thank you.
Thank you.
The past Saturday at St. Clair High School, Mr. Alley did a great job. They had a zombie run, the 5K run, and the money for that goes to the endowment fund and stuff like that. But it was at 7 o'clock at night, so if you wonder how they run with lights on, but this is how they did it. They put the hat on and did their running and walking. And I'd say, I don't know, half or whatever, kids and adults dressed up in Halloween costumes. So it was a nice evening get together.
Right.
And also, just remind the citizens to go vote a week from tomorrow.
Absolutely. Nothing else? Dr. Skalka, administration.
Yes, we start off, Kirk Grzelka, our Director of Operations, has worked with Bob Grave and Chuck French of DTE on a grant proposal to repair and replace playground equipment, primarily swings, at Gearing Elementary School. I'm happy to say that we received a $2,000 check and have ordered and received the new equipment. It'll be starting to be installed shortly. Mr. Grzelka reports that Mr. Grave and Mr. French are receptive to continue to help the district fund safety-related projects, and we will continue to work with them to do that. So at this time, we'd wish to recognize Mr. Grave, Mr. French, and all of DTE this evening for their generosity. If they could come forward, President Buer has recognition for you.
East China School District Board of Education awards a certificate to DTE Energy for appreciation in assisting the East China School District to provide safe and reliable playground and recreational equipment for our students, given this 27th day of October, 2014. Well, gentlemen, we thank you so very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
We wanted to recognize tonight as well Mr. Bob Freehan from the St. Clair Historical Museum, but he is going to be unable to attend tonight and asked if we could do that at our November meeting, and so we said certainly. Paul Decker, St. Clair Middle School Band Director, also had a recognition and presentation tonight, but unfortunately he too is unable to attend tonight. So I'm going to skip just to the last item of interest and recognition. This one is, we're very proud to announce that Assistant Principal and Athletic Director Jeff Cook received his EDD, and for those of you who are unaware, it is the education doctorate, like a lawyer would receive a JD or a doctor would receive a MD. He received his EDD, from Central Michigan University. So congratulations, Dr. Cook. Friday night, Mariners, Saturday afternoon, Saints. We start the march to Ford Field. Hope you can be there.
Exciting times again. Special recognition is our third item on our agenda. East China Educational Foundation grants. Mrs. Colleen Stover, Mrs. Laura Karadimas presenting.
Good evening. My name is Laura Karadimas, and my sidekick here, Colleen Stover, and we are board members of the East China Educational Foundation. So we get the fun job of raising money and giving away grants for it. So again, we had a wonderful, well, I understand, a wonderful time Saturday night at the Zombie Fun Run at the St. Clair Middle School. This was our first time doing it this year, so hopefully in many years to come it'll grow. And we have our Chili Heart Run coming up in February again. So we'll try to make this quick. Again, we're the East China Educational Foundation Fund. This is the 2014 Fall Grant recipients. A little bit about the foundation. It's an endowment fund through the Community Foundation of St. Clair County. With fall 2014 awards, over $100,000 have been given out in grants. 2014 Fall Grant Award recipients, 17 grants ranging from $160 to $1,200 are being awarded tonight for a total of $8,252. The Pamela Bumler Memorial Fund. The foundation voted to donate $250 to the Pamela, am I pronouncing it Bumler Memorial Fund for the purpose of creating a reading nook at the Bell River Elementary in memory of Pamela's dedication to ensure that every student learns the love of reading. Look at them.
Now, who are these ladies?
Oh.
I know, but the audience don't know. I don't think.
Okay, thank you, ladies. Next is Carrie Estapa from St. Clair Middle School. Carrie is purchasing an iPad to enhance her science curriculum, allowing her students to be the creators of testing their own hypothesis. Carrie, there she is. Next, Paul Dimmer from Marine City High. Paul is using the money for entrance fees for his Science Olympiad team. Paul, you've changed. Next is Amy Lawson from Gearing Elementary. Amy is purchasing items used to create sensory boxes for her special education students. Next is Karen Maitland from Bell River Elementary. Karen is purchasing apps for her iPad to use with her speech students to increase articulation skills. Michelle Fay from Marine City Middle School. Michelle is purchasing an iPad for the extensive apps available to assist her special education students in speech therapy. Kelly Randolph from Gearing Elementary. Kelly is purchasing pocket chart stands for the cognitively impaired classroom to improve operations by reducing the noise level and visual distractions. Brooke Nowakowski and Nicole Flynn from St. Clair Middle School. Brooke and Nicole are using this money to purchase tickets for their students to attend the Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo exhibits at the Detroit Institute of Arts. That'll be fun. Tracy Bendit, St. Clair Middle School. Tracy is purchasing an iPad for her special education students, enhancing the learning process. Heidi Lindstrom from Marine City High. Heidi is purchasing SNAP circuit kits for her physics students so they can explore the world of electricity. Megan Hargrave, Sarah Ranger, and Robin Lizchek from Gearing Elementary. These ladies are purchasing several items for their early childhood program to enhance their classroom, encouraging vocalization, speech, and imaginary play skills. Christy Sagan from Palms Elementary. Christy is purchasing a renewal online database subscription for all Palms students. Pebble Go. Next is Kelly Thomas from Marine City Middle. Kelly is purchasing an iPad for her physical education classes, providing ease in managing a class with no computer, as well as a wonderful tool to track student progress throughout the year. Pat Keck from Riverview East. Pat is purchasing books for their in-house young adult library. Leslie Stoffer from Marine City High. Leslie is using her money to purchase wall decor and reading incentives for her media center. Pamela Young, Marine City Middle School. This money will be used to purchase items for the Science Olympiad team. Shelly Selecki from Pine River. Shelly is using this money to purchase a drum sets for the young students, enhancing her music program. Congratulations to the 2014 Fall Grant recipients. She might want to get a picture. Okay, to donate, you can make checks payable to the Community Foundation of St. Clair County, East China Educational Foundation, and send your checks to the school district. See? And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.
Mrs. Stover, may I ask one question? Wasn't this one of the largest givings of grants in one sitting? $8,200? Wasn't that a large amount compared to what we've done in the past?
Well, we try not to turn anyone down that's asking for a grant, and we don't get out of that room until we figure out how to give as much money away as we can. And it's not getting harder, it's a delightful chore, but we need to get out and get people at the zombie run and the chili heart run and get the schools involved for our fundraisers so we can give that money right back to their teachers. But yes, this was a large amount for us.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is our academic spotlight, Bell River Elementary School. Dr. Patty Andrea, principal, highlighting how Bell River staff promotes positive behavior.
Good evening, Dr. Skalka and board. Tonight, we are going to be presenting some information about promoting positive behaviors at Bell River Elementary. Tonight I have Kelly Parkinson with me, who is our new social worker, and so she's going to help me out and talk a little bit about behavior plans. And last year when I was here, we talked about our character education program, which was We Are One Team. And we talked about the different things that students are learning as they go through the program. And so tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to piggyback onto that and talk about a few more specific things. With the program, students are taught, I better go in the right direction. Students are taught a number of different things, how to tell the difference between tattling and telling, and how to set goals and how to achieve their goals. But also we know that every year we have Basketball Jones comes and visits us and inspires the students to do their best, their personal best, and that's a character program that we're following. We Are One Team. And here he is in action. He was here last week. If you noticed in the audience, there's different colored T-shirts. So each grade level has a different color T-shirt, and we have. It's just when we're talking about our character education and we're doing special things in the building, we all wear our T-shirts. So we are promoting all of the positive and behaviors that we're seeing in the building. We're teaching the students all of the different character skills, but every once in a while we realize that we make a mistake. Regardless of hearing what you're supposed to be doing, the right things, we do make mistakes. And we know that as we're growing up, we don't necessarily get it the first time, but we take a look at mistakes as opportunities to learn once again. And so when we have students who are having difficulty and they are making a few mistakes that maybe impact other people around them, we make sure that we talk about what it is that they have done wrong, and instead of the students have to kind of address it themselves, and so we have them think about it, and then of course we have to let the parents inform the parents. And one way that we inform the parents is our behavioral form, so that we can keep track of the data and we can kind of monitor it to make sure what we're doing is working with the students. Sometimes we have to make a phone call home also. So what happens if all of these strategies don't work? This is what happens next.
What happens next? A lot of times the social worker gets called in. Yay. And I'd like to take a moment to tell you I am so very thrilled to be back in East China School District. I received a very warm welcome, and it's a really nice feeling. But So what happens next is we start to look at the inappropriate behaviors, and we track those behaviors, and we use data to determine if the strategies that we're using are working. And if not, then we go in and we tweak things and try to tailor a behavior intervention plan that is individualized toward the student's needs. Usually a team meeting is called. Well, not usually, all of the time a team meeting is called, because we really focus on a team approach where we involve the teacher consultants, and if the OT is involved, or the principal, the social worker, and the parents, and oftentimes the student will be involved as well in making some decisions about what needs to happen. So what is a behavioral plan? First of all, we want, behavior plans are often, as you know, educational acronyms. They're called BIPs. And we want to identify the behaviors that are interfering with the student's learning and or the learning of the other students or peers in the classroom. So we look at tailoring a plan. And in each plan, we have, because we have a team, we sit and we delegate or designate which members of the team will be responsible for each part of the behavior plan, because we each play a different role, and so everyone takes a different part because we can't be with that student all of the time. So sometimes the parapros will monitor, the teachers will monitor, the social workers will monitor, and we take shifts collecting data to determine if a plan is going to be effective or if alterations might need to be made. Our ultimate goal is to extinguish undesirable behaviors and replace them with a desired behavior that will allow for the student's optimal learning. Before we actually create a behavioral plan, we have to do what's called a functional behavioral assessment, or an FBA. This takes place before the actual development of the BIP, because we have to go in and we have to, through observations and interviews and history and collecting past data, we have to look at behaviors across a multitude of environments. For example, I might go into a classroom with students and observe the student in their classroom, at lunch, at recess, during one of their specials, to get a clearer picture of what the behavior looks like and if there's any particular set of events or circumstances that trigger certain behaviors. So a variety of data tools, collection tools are used, and they monitor the frequency and intensity of the behavior. And that's where we start. A lot of times we have to get together and again, revise the program, revise the plan to make sure that it's tailored specifically to the student and that we're addressing those needs that the student has. So behavior science says behavior is communication, behavior is learned, and behavior can change. Appropriate and effective feedback leads to changes in behavior.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for us at this time?
Yes, Mr. Folston.
This behavior plan, is this something new, or has you just been adding to it or fine-tuning it as year after year, or what's?
No, behavior plans have always been in place for
Right.
students. So you mean, do they follow the student? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes, they follow the student, and depending on, you know, any transition that they might make from, say, elementary to middle school, because the environment changes and the circumstances and sometimes the behaviors change,
Okay.
that plan would follow them. Again, ultimately, our goal is to extinguish the behavior so that we don't have to have a behavior plan anymore.
So the student doesn't fall through the cracks,
That's
for to
right.
say, you guys try to follow them through then.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Excuse me.
And as far as if a behavior plan starts with a student that's in kindergarten or first grade, a number of times students figure out what's going on, and they no longer have to have a plan. So that's a real positive. That's when we're seeing that. And almost always we have to tweak the plan and to get it right,
Right.
as the student evolves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful program.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Approval of minutes for the September 22nd, 2014 regular meeting, October 13th, 2014 special meeting, approval of payment of bills, financial statement, schedule of investments, approval of teacher rehire. Motion is needed.
So move.
Moved by Mr. Folsky.
Support.
Support by Mrs. Murphy. Comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Next item is persons wishing to address the board. No green card? Okay. We'll move on. Item 7 is our reports, our parent advisory. Mr. John Folsky is our board member that attends those.
You have a list in front of you of what was discussed at the October 6th meeting. About half the meeting, Dr. Skalka talked about the bus proposal and answered questions from the parent advisory people. And by the way, the parent advisory people, they represent every school in the building, in the district. There are 2 or 3 parents from each school involved. The administrators that were there, they gave their update on things that are going on at the buildings and stuff, and you can see what's happening at the buildings as the things that throughout the month that's gone on. And that's about it. Any other questions?
No, it was an excellent representation from all the buildings. We appreciate those folks who come out. They are, like our PTO officers, really key communicators for the district. And so principals and anyone else, if you're interested in knowing who those folks are that represent your schools, we'll make sure to let you know, because they come out, they get the scoop, so to speak, and are really an avenue for us, in addition to every other communication device we have, to get out some really important messages about what's going on. And it works the other way. They can bring questions to us as well.
I just really quickly wanted to make
Yes.
a quick comment. I appreciate the building happenings. That's a good addition. I like it.
Yep. Excuse me, that goes to Kelly.
All right, next item on the agenda is the student advisory. Dr. Skalka?
Yes, we have student advisory on the Wednesday after the Monday of parent advisory on a quarterly basis. Representatives from the 3 high schools attend, and again, I am always impressed by just how much our students do, how much they're involved in. There wasn't a single representative there who isn't involved in 2 or 3 school activities, community activities. It might be a church group or something else. And they all have such amazing plans for post-graduation and for the future. So it is very much invigorating for me. I enjoy that day. And just like parent advisory, they're able to ask any questions of us that they're interested in. Weren't any this time around. They were more just interested in just kind of schmoozing. And the nice thing is it brings the 3 high schools together too. So so they get a chance to talk with one another, and they will often ask, do you do that at your school? You know, and as a result, they take some ideas back to their principals. So again, a very, very productive use of time, and I look forward to it each quarter.
It is a great meeting. It was amazing. It's made up of juniors and seniors. There was not a single student sitting at that table that did not have post-secondary aspirations as to where they wanted to go, and all the different schools they rattled off as to where they were looking at going. Just, I know it made me feel proud of how our students are preparing themselves. So it was a great meeting.
Okay.
Next item is the ballot proposal update. Dr.
Great.
Skalka.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Headley, are you going to run, or do I? Oh, there you go. Thank you. I just wanted to provide a couple of slides that folks have already seen, and remind everyone, as Mr. Folsky said, please get out and vote. It is a week from tomorrow, and we're all looking forward to the day. Again, the purpose of the ballot proposal to raise the necessary funds to purchase approximately 25 buses over the next 5 years. We bond for a certain amount of money. You can't bond for a certain number of items, and therefore, working with our folks, our bond attorneys and others, we've looked at rates of inflation and things like that to estimate how much we would need to do that over the next 5 years. Wanted to get a couple of frequently asked questions that have come up in my meetings. I've spoke now to probably about 15 to 18 community groups trying to get the word out, and we have some common questions. And one of which was, I thought a few years back, East China residents passed a millage to have new turf installed. What happened? The reality was, back in 2012, the vote was to renew the sinking fund for a period of, I believe, 10 years. And the sinking fund is the ability to renovate, or to replace, renovate, and fix existing capital investments. Maybe you need a new roof or something along those lines. One of the projects that was talked about at the time of passing that was to replace the turf field. So the actual election and the purpose of that vote was not to solely do that activity. It was to do several. So when I came on board roughly about 16 months ago now, it was brought to my attention the two major projects at Bell and Pine River, the lintel replacements. So together with the director of operations at the time, we brought in an independent organization to do an assessment of the turf, to determine the safety of the turf. When they determined that it was safe to play on, we prioritized the three projects as the summer of 14 to replace the Bell River lintels and to do that repair, summer of 15 to do the turf, and summer of 16 to do the Pine River repair. Well, summer of 14 has passed. We did do the Bell repairs on time and under budget, and so that was a very positive thing. The stadium turf project is proceeding. Mr. Grzelka, the Director of Operations, again, has worked with the same firm that oversaw the initial installation of that turf, and they have done a series of meetings to get ready, and we had our first meeting last week with the two high school principals, athletic directors, and varsity head football coaches. Soccer coaches were invited, but they said, that's okay, whatever you guys decide. And we are making progress, and everything is in line to do that project this summer. And then, logically, we will do the Pine repair the summer afterwards. Okay? So that's the first one. What happens if the school board decides to privatize transportation during the term of this bond? And that speaks to what Trustee Richley brought up earlier. And last spring, this Board of Education took a very serious and hard look at contracting transportation services. Several ideas were, bids were solicited, including a serious look at the leasing of buses. I commend the board for the hard work it did to educate themselves as to the options available to it. And at the time, the decision was made that they would like to forestall. In fact, they would like to not contract if at all possible. And that is why the ballot proposal was suggested at the time, I believe by Trustee McNamee, and approved by the board as a whole. The reality is that you can bond for the building of new facilities, for the renovation of facilities, or for large capital purchases such as technology or school buses. You cannot ask your voters for additional operating millage or operating funds to pay for the day-to-day operation of the school. So the actual ballot language, which is on the website as well as in the materials we've been passing out, speaks exactly to the fact that this proposal is solely for the purchase of buses. That if passed, The monies will be independently audited, as all bond proposal passages are, and can be used only for the purchase of buses, not for the repair of them, not to be diverted for salaries or other uses. It is solely for the purchase of buses. And the reason why that is important is because our drivers, basically, we need the capital for them to actually have buses to drive. And so to answer the question specifically, I cannot say, I can only control, I guess the best way to say it is I can only control what I personally do, but I will tell you and I will tell the community that if passing, I will not bring contracting of transportation to this board during the term of this bond, because I think the purpose was very clearly stated to the board that we need the buses in order to, and that it was the board's desire to stay in the transportation business if the community would help out and provide the necessary support to purchase the buses. Okay. Tax impact. 0.05 mils in the first year, or 5 cents on every $1,000. Average of 0.24 mils over the life of the 8-year bond spread over 10 tax collections. Next slide, please. You've all seen this slide before. It is also part of our factual materials on the website and that we hand out, and it's extremely important to understand. We currently have 2 bonds that we are paying off, 1998 and 2009. We'll speak to why that's important here, but so using the simplest math I can use, a $100,000 home, that's the market value, and you are not taxed on the market value of your home, you are taxed on the taxable value, which is approximately, not exactly, but usually approximately about half the market value. So if we take that $50,000 of taxable value, apply the 0.05 mils, you know that the cost of this proposal is $2.50 for the year, not weekly, not monthly. It is $2.50 for the year. You say, well, how's $2.50 going to buy a bus? Well, every single home paying something along the lines adds up pretty quickly to the point where we are then able to purchase those approximate 25 buses over the course of this bond. You can see down that second column that the millage grows 0.09, 0.11. If I average all of those, that's the 0.24 I spoke about in the last slide, goes up to 0.39. The tax impact as it's going up rises to the total of $19.50 there in 2019-20. And again, that's less than $20 for the entire year. But please take a look at the second to last 2 columns. Yes, in the first year, the millage for these 3 bonded proposals goes up 0.05, but does not go up after that, even though the 2014 bond proposal millage does go up. The 3 together do not. And the reason for that is you can see on the back end of the second column, it starts going down. Well, that's what's happening with the 1998 and the 2009 bonds. They are on the downside of their repayment schedule. So as a result, that total tax impact after that initial year of $2.50 remains at that figure all the way until 2019-20, when the 1998 bond is fully paid off. And at that point in time, it drops dramatically to $106, again, for this particular home. And again, in the year 21-22, it drops to the equivalent of just the 2014 bond as the 2009 bond is paid off. Please, I recognize that people are saying, well, $157, I pay a heck of a lot more than that in property tax. This reflects the district's bonded indebtedness. This does not reflect police and fire millage, the library millage, or anything else that you might be paying, but just the district indebtedness. And in reality, as we said, for this particular home and for your home, you can maybe make a gauge based on that $100,000 figure, or if you're really interested exactly in what it costs, you receive an annual statement from the local assessor that gives your taxable value. Pull that out. You use it for your taxes every year. Pull that out. Multiply your taxable value of your home by 0.00005. 4 zeros and a 5. That's the actual, .05 mils, again, is when applied to your value. A mil is 100th of a cent, so you have to move that decimal point, and you can figure that out. I bring that up again to show the relative inexpensiveness, that's a good grammar, of this particular proposal. And also because when I am out speaking about the proposal, two questions are asked of me. What's it going to cost me, as we've just talked about, and what happens if it doesn't pass? So let me touch briefly on the what happens if it doesn't pass, because that would get to the other question that Trustee Richley asked earlier. I've said that there are primarily three options if it does not pass. The first option would be that the district would continue to provide transportation services at the level that we are now by purchasing school buses out of the general fund. We know that we're trying to close a deficit. This would add $200,000 to $400,000 to that deficit, which would more than likely mean the elimination of several student programs, academic and extracurricular, for that kind of a cost. So that's one option, is to pull it out of the general fund. The second option, and this speaks to Trustee Richley when he talked about walking radius, is that as buses are no longer repairable, as they just become too old and they are no longer safe to drive, we would just reduce the fleet. So the fleet would gradually grow smaller, they wouldn't be replaced, and as the fleet grows smaller, the walking radius would increase. To the point where the example that I have been providing, because it was told to me, and I probably should look it up to make sure I'm accurate, but I have been told that Kalkaska School District has not provided transportation for a number of years, that everyone's on their own to get their kids to school, either older brothers or sisters or the families themselves. I'm sure that they potentially contract for athletic trips or things like that. But actually, day-to-day, getting your kids back and forth to school, they do not provide, because we are not required, actually, to provide transportation. Okay. Third option would be to revisit contracting, either via a attrition, again, a bus attrition situation, whereby we wouldn't sell the fleet initially, or by selling the fleet as part of the overall contract. But that would be a third option to revisit that if indeed this does not pass. So that's a little update on the ballot proposal. Again, please vote. And by all means, take a look at the district website that has all this information on it, including a short 4-minute video by Mr. Bewer explaining all the information much more eloquently than I.
Yes, Mr. Rich.
Just really quickly, I wanted to remind those that are running for office and also doing things for the proposal and against the proposal. You're not allowed to put signs on public property or school district property. But the other thing that I'm concerned with is that all new hires are still being hired through the company Metz. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And if the bond passes, that would still be
That would be the planned attrition. That would be the attrition plan still in place.
So, for instance, just as a scenario of looking forward, if this bond passes, then that would mean that not only is there privatization now, but it would continue. I'm not sure how many drivers off the top of my head are with Metz versus with the district, but that's going to continue to grow as drivers that are currently with the district are retiring. So that would, in essence, mean we're we're privatizing.
Over time, that would be correct. To do otherwise would to again increase the deficit and increase the amount of cuts that would have to be made as just the cost of employment would increase.
Now, I don't want to sound like a smart aleck here, but if a driver that is older and towards the retirement age that has worked for the district for several years and they've worked their way up to a certain wage, then the newer driver coming in would be lower, I mean, than the current.
Correct. And with retirement costs, that would, again, raise the amount that would be required to employ that person.
And one last thing I wanted to suggest was that we're talking about, like with that, I believe it was $200,000 to $400,000 was the.
Depending on how many buses you bought per year, and that's why I gave a range.
Right.
You know, the 25 buses over 5 years looks to not only replace, we have a bus fleet of 46, we have a lifespan of 12 to 14 years. You ought to be looking at replacing 4 buses a year. We have not, we're going to have to play a little bit of catch up, and that's why we are looking at trying to buy 5 buses a year. If we were to go with a pure replacement plan of 4 buses a year, you'd be looking at, you know, a little under 400,000. If you only did 2 buses a year, you'd fall further behind. But obviously, you'd be taking less out of the general fund.
But I have one more suggestion. If the bonds, God forbid it does fail, I suggest that we buy used buses rather than brand spanking new buses with all the bells and whistles. And as well as, with that being said, to potentially, you know, there's less students coming in, and I think that we could potentially retire part of the fleet. But the other thing is that privatization will not, or privatizing will not eliminate the cost of buses. And that's what, I mean, we will get that 1 point whatever million influx at the outset of doing it, but the fact is it's not, long term, as we saw with the presentation a few months ago, it's not going to, long term, it's not going to be a solution. So that's all I have to say about that.
As we do reduce the number of students, we know that where we are able to eliminate bus runs, we do. But as we lose students, the size of our district does not shrink. And our students still live scattered across the entire district. And so instead of picking up 10 kids at the furthest point of the district, we might be picking up 5 kids, or maybe eventually 2 kids. Or if there's only 1 kid left, should we tell them that they need to walk now or they need to get a drive because we're just not going to come out and get you? I mean, the idea at this point in time is where we are able to, and we did, where we're able, part of one of the reasons for bringing the middle school times in Marine City to the high school times was both educationally sound, and it allowed us to reduce a run. So that was helpful. But again, the size of the district isn't going to change. And where our kids live are still going to be scattered across that. So that's kind of a specious argument that when we lose kids, that we'll be able to reduce runs. There was another piece, but I'm sorry, I forgot.
I have a quick question for
Yes,
you.
Mrs. Burke.
I've been asked what we're going to do with our old fleet as we eliminate it.
Mhm.
I'd like you to explain it.
It has been district practice over the last many years that we use a third party to auction our buses. Any capital purchase, any capital equipment that we have, we cannot privately sell to anyone. So the idea that it's been brought up to us and maybe to you as a board, well, I know a guy who would have given you more. That's illegal. Okay, you have to put it out on an auction, and you take, just like you take the lowest bid when you're bidding a project, you take the highest bid when you're at to auction off a bus. So if someone is actually willing to buy it, we would sell it. If not, it would go for as much scrap as we could get. But you have to do it through a bid process or an auction process.
And that money goes right back to the general fund.
That money goes back to the general fund.
So the guy could put a bid in
Absolutely.
at the auction.
Absolutely. But again, we would be opening ourselves up to accusations of cronyism, if you will, or conflict of interest if we went down the street and just sold them a bus. Right?
Questions? Okay. We will move on. Our Last report is our 2013-14 audit report. Mr. Curtis McBride.
Good evening, School Board, Dr. Skelka. My name is Curtis McBride, and I'm a CPA for McBride Manley & Company. We are from the firm that audits the school district. I've been with the firm for just over 14 years, and I'm the managing partner for our firm. Also with me this evening is Gwen Brzezinski. She is our audit manager, and she was also directly involved with the audit this year. Now, before I get into my actual presentation, I want to talk about the audit process in general. As in the prior years, the audit experience was very positive for us. Your finance department was very helpful and very cooperative in getting us the information that we needed to complete our audit. And I'm also pleased to announce that we didn't have any disputes or disagreements with your finance department over the course of our audit. And as I said in prior years, I really think your finance department does a very good job, especially considering the limited resources they have. So again, I think they should be commended for that. Also, before I get into the actual slides, there are 3 types of audit opinions you can receive as an auditee. The first opinion, which is the highest level of opinion, is an unmodified or a clean opinion. That basically means that your financial statements are materially in compliance with what we call generally accepted accounting principles. Now, the second type of opinion is what we call a modified opinion, or a qualified opinion, which means that for the most part the financial statements are in compliance, but there may be minor exceptions to that. And of course, the last audit opinion you can receive, or the worst, is an adverse opinion, which means you cannot rely on those financial statements at all. So I am pleased to announce that for the period ended June 30, 2014, East China School District received an unmodified or a clean opinion. Now, the one thing I do want to clarify, because there is a common misconception as to what that means, that just simply means that we believe that those financial statements are in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. It does not mean, we're not giving an opinion on the financial health of the district. So I want to clarify that. I have also handed out a physical copy of my presentation for you this evening. I know it's a little bit easier to follow, maybe you're in paper form as opposed to on the screen. The only thing I ask of you is that you do not distribute this to the public, because this is summarized information from my full report, and it does not contain my audit opinion. So please just use this for your own internal purposes. Now, the next slide I'm going to talk about, or the first slide, is the balance sheet for the general fund. Now, when looking at the balance sheet, you can see, looking at the top where we have the assets, you have just over $4.4 million in cash and investments at June 30, 2014. In the other major asset category is amounts due from other governmental units of about $4.9 million. That's primarily amounts due from the state of Michigan for state aid. About $4.2 million out of that $4.9 is state aid. Now, what that is actually state aid monies that you received in July and August of 2014 that were related to May and June of 2014. So they really belonged in the June 30, 2014 fiscal year, and that's why they're in receivables. So at the year ending June 30, 2014, the general fund had total assets of about $9.7 million. And against those assets, you had debts and other obligations of about $5.2 million, which left you with an ending fund balance in the general fund of just over $4.5 million. Now, I'll talk about the general fund level in a little bit more detail in my subsequent slide. Now, this next slide is the general fund statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. That's just another way of saying an income statement. So this is the general fund's income statement for the year ended June 30, 2014. Now, the general fund primarily derives its revenues from 2 sources: property taxes and state aid. So you can see, looking at property taxes, the general fund derived about $13.2 or $13.3 million in property taxes during the year, and you derived another $23.8 or $23.9 million in revenues from state aid. So the general fund finished the year with total revenues of about $40.2 million, and you had about $40.6 million in expenditures in the general fund during the year. I'll talk about expenditures in a little bit more detail in subsequent slides when I get into expenditures by function and type. So that left you with a net loss in your general fund during the year of about $400,000. So you actually used about $416,000 or $417,000 of your general fund balance during the fiscal year ended June 30, 2014. So the general fund finished the year with a fund balance of just over $4.5 million. Now, to put that into perspective, the state of Michigan generally recommends that you have a minimum fund balance level in your general fund for a school district of about 10% of your annual expenditures in that fund. So in looking at the school district for the year, you had $4.5 million in fund balance, and you had about $40.6 million in annual expenditures. So right now it's sitting at about 11% at the end of 2014. So you are above the 10% recommended minimum. However, your challenge as a school board is to make sure that you, at a minimum, maintain your current fund balance level. If you budget to have $400,000 or $500,000 losses for the next couple years, you will be well under the 10% recommended fund balance level, recommended by the state of Michigan. Now, this next slide is the general fund revenues by source. And in this slide, I have a comparison between 2013 and 2014. Now, as I mentioned in the previous slide, you can see property taxes were about $13.2 or $13.3 million of total revenues for 14, or about 33% of the total. And about 59% of the general fund's revenues are derived from state aid at about $23.9 million. Now, when you compare 2013 to 2014, you can see that you actually had a slight increase in your revenues between the 2 years. So 2013 had about $40 million in total revenues, and 2014, the general fund had about $40.2 million in total revenues. So it's about a 0.5% increase between 2013 and 2014. Now, the one interesting thing to note in comparing the 2 years, even though you did have a slight increase, you can see that the allocation of the revenues are pretty consistent between the 2 years. So 2013 property taxes were about 33% of total revenues. They were also about 33% in 2014. And state aid in 2013 was about 59% of total revenues. And again, in 2014, it was about 59% of total revenues. So really, the allocation between the 2 years is pretty consistent. And in looking at the pie chart on the bottom, you can see that the revenues derived from the state of Michigan is represented by the large portion of the pie chart. Now, this next slide is where we start looking at the general fund expenditures in a little bit more detail. This is the general fund expenditures by function. And again, I have a comparison between 2013 and 2014. As you can see, the majority of the expenditures are in a function called basic programs. And this is actually typical of a school district. Now, basic functions really is made up of salaries, benefits, and supplies of the high schools, the middle schools, and the grade schools. So it would make sense that that would be the largest expenditure function for the school district. So about $22 million for 2014 was for basic programs, or about 54 or 55% of the total. Now, the second line is another major category, added needs. That's primarily special education. So that was about $3.8 million for 2014, or about 9 or 10% of the total. Now, when comparing 2013 to 2014, you can see that your expenditures for 13 were about $40.8 million, and for 2014, it was about $40.6 million. So that's about a decrease of 0.5%. And similar to the revenues, when you compare the 2 years, you can see that even though you had a slight change in the total, the allocation between the expenditures is pretty consistent. Now, this next slide is the general fund expenditures by type. I've actually gone back an additional year in this slide, so I have 2012 presented here. In looking at the school district, you can see the majority of the expenditures are for salaries and benefits related to those salaries. Now, looking at 2012, you can see that salaries in the general fund were about 24.4 or $24.5 million. And for 2014, that the total salaries cost was about $23 million. And you have a very similar relationship with benefits. You can see, looking at 2012, total benefits in the general fund were about $12.5 million. And in 2014, it came down to about $11.8 million. So looking at 2012, you had total expenses in the general fund of about $42 million, and you finished 2014 with about $40.6 million. Now, this next slide is a 5-year historical revenue and expenditure trend for the general fund. And as you can see, I go all the way back to June 30, 2010. I have revenues on the left and expenditures on the right side of the slide. And looking at revenues first, you can see that the peak year for revenues was actually June 30, 2010, where the general fund generated about $45 million in total revenues. And that number has come all the way down to about $40.2 million at the end of 2014. So you've had about a $5 million decrease in general fund revenues going back to 2010. Now, that's primarily a result of a decline in student population, which of course is directly related to state aid, and a loss in property tax revenues, which of course resulted in a decline in property tax values throughout the area. In looking at expenditures, going back, looking at the same 5 years, you can see that the peak year for expenditures was 2010 at about $45.8 million, and expenditures also came down significantly to about $40.6 million in 2014. And of course, the reduction in expenditures is a direct result of the budgeting process because you guys were anticipating the loss in revenues over that time period. So again, your challenge going forward is to try to continue this and to manage your budget as you have a declining revenue in that fund, in the general fund. Now, this slide is general fund financial data compared to other Michigan school districts. Now, I obtained this information from the Michigan Department of Education Bulletin 1011, but this is always 1 year behind. So the information from the Michigan Department of Ed is actually for 12-13 fiscal year, and I'm comparing it to your 2013-2014 fiscal year. Now, the one thing that really can be gleaned from this slide, if you look near the bottom, the fund balance is a percentage of total expenditures. As I mentioned in the income statement slide, your general fund is at about 11% level right now as a percentage of expenditures. When you look at the average for all districts in the state, it's about 8.5%. If you look at districts of similar size to East China, it's about 8.7%. So as you can see, you guys are not alone in having to deal with these budget issues. But again, you really need to make sure that you take steps to make sure that you're not in the 8% range. So, like I said, that's your challenge going forward. Now, the next fund I'm going to talk about is the debt fund. This is what we call a debt service fund, and the debt service fund's assets are restricted for a specific purpose, and that specific purpose is for the payment of debt. And in this case, you have 2 outstanding bond issues at about $27.3 million at the end of 2014. These 2 bonds actually mature in 2021. Now, when looking at the balance sheet for the debt fund, you can see that all of the assets are in the form of cash, about $500,000, and it had a fund balance of about $500,000. Now, the debt fund is financed almost exclusively with property tax revenues. And of course, as I mentioned before, those property tax revenues are restricted for the payment of those bonds. This is the income statement for the debt service fund. You can see that the debt service fund generated about $4.2 or $4.3 million in property tax revenues during the year, for a total of just under $4.3 million in revenues, and all of its expenditures were for the payment of bonds and the interest associated with those bonds at about $5.2 or $5.3 million. The next fund I'm going to talk about is the sinking fund. This is what we call a capital projects fund. Now, similar to the debt fund, its assets and revenue stream is restricted for a specific purpose. And in this case, the specific purpose is construction and major renovations, as Dr. Skelka had indicated before. In looking at the balance sheet, you can see that it had about $423,000 in total assets for the year ended June 30, 2014. Some liabilities of $355,000 with a total ending fund balance of $68,000. This is the income statement for the sinking fund. Also similar to the debt service fund, the sinking fund generates its revenues almost exclusively from property taxes. So it had about $659,000 in property taxes for the year, and you can see its expenditures are for capital outlay because this fund can only use its revenues for major capital improvements. And as I mentioned in the prior slide, it finished with an ending fund balance of about $68,000. Now, the important thing to note about these two funds I just discussed, the debt and the sinking fund, as I mentioned, they're restricted. So what that means is you cannot use the excess funds for general operating purposes. So you can't transfer these funds over to the general fund. Any questions?
Comments or questions? Mr. Folsky?
Back to the fund balance. If I understood you right, looking at these figures, that we spent more than what we took in?
That is correct.
Okay, so...
If you look at the, I believe it would be the third slide that I have, the general fund statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Yeah, if you look at the about 3/4 of the way down, where it says excess deficiency of revenues and other financing sources over expenditures, that $416,000, that is the net loss in the general fund for the year ended June 30, 2014.
But what I'm getting at is we're spending more than we're taking in. We're going to run ourselves into trouble, even if we do have a little fund balance.
That is correct. That is what that $416,000 represents. It's exactly what you said. It means that you spent more than the revenues you took in for the year in the general fund.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, you're sitting at about a $4.5 million fund balance. In really, you have to look at it in perspective on a scale. So when you compare it to your annual expenditures of about $40.6 million, it's only sitting at about in 11%. Right there. And like I said, the state of Michigan recommends that at a minimum you're at the 10% level. So really what that means is once you're approaching that 10% level, you need to start taking steps and measures to make sure that you start building your fund balance back up and take steps to ensure that you don't drop below the 10% level.
But on the bond issue, we're doing the same thing there. Am I correct? We're spending more than what...
Correct. Those are a little bit different. The bond issue, you're actually not supposed to have excessive fund balance because it's restricted for a specific purpose. So there isn't really a recommended or a required fund balance level in that fund. The important thing is that you don't have a negative fund balance in that fund. So as long as you have the property taxes generated, generally over a period of time to pay off the debt service, you're in pretty good shape.
Okay.
So I don't see any issues in that fund.
Okay. Do you still send the final report and everything to Lansing for their...
Yes, we do.
The Treasury Department or whoever, and then they look it over and...
That is correct.
Go from there. You still send it to them. Okay, thank you.
Okay. When does the fund balance monies hit our books for each year?
Well, that's a difficult question. When the actual monies hit your books...
Pardon me, sinking fund balance.
Oh, the sinking fund.
When do those monies hit our books each year? Beginning of the school year?
Tina might know.
Yeah, Tina would probably know the actual timing of when the cash flow would hit the fund balance.
Good evening, President Viewer. The tax levies are levied on July, and the taxpayers will pay those associated bills through July and August, and then the appropriate taxing unit will submit those monies to us. So we will start to get the monies
in those funds the end of July through August and the beginning of September. So at about mid-September and end of September, we've received all of our cash, or a good portion of the cash.
Okay. Thank you.
Any additional questions?
Mr. Ritchley.
This is potentially an ignorant question, but it's about the debt fund activity. Under the summary where it says other, you mentioned it about how there's 13,000 that comes from other. I was just curious, like what, because other than taxes, I was curious what that other was.
Sure. I mean, that could be interest income.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, if you have money held in a money market or savings account, it's most likely what that money would be.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Mr. McBride, I'd like to thank you and your firm for the service you render to the district and helping us keep our books compliant for state and federal laws every year.
Thank
We
you,
thank
President
you.
Buer.
Also like to thank Tina Weglars and her staff for receiving such high marks and the cooperation and assistance you gave Mr. McBride and his firm. Thank you. Next item is the information discussion items, summer tax levy.
Quickly, each year at this time, we are required to have you pass a motion, a resolution, renewing or reaffirming your desire to have a summer tax collection so that we in turn can then provide that to the local taxing units so they can prepare for, as Ms. Wegler says, collection in July and August. And so that normally, that vote, that resolution takes place at your November meeting. We have to notify the tax authorities in December. So given your practice of wanting to discuss one month and act the next, I just put it here to alert you that it's coming in November. It's nothing new. It's something that you do each year in order to authorize the summer tax levy.
Anybody have any questions?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll probably go to Mrs. Wegler's. Is there any downside to summer tax levy? Any reason why we wouldn't want to do it? I don't see one.
Well, with every situation, there's always a downside. And one of the downsides to the summer tax collection is some of the jurisdictions will charge us for a collection that is outside their normal collection period. So we have some jurisdictions that will charge $1 per parcel and up to $3 per parcel. So that is the downside. But as our fund balance decreases, we are more and more dependent on our cash flows and our fund balance at the beginning of our year.
Yeah, if I could really speak to that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that really is a huge issue of cash flow. You know that we do not receive a state aid payment during the month of August, during the month of September. During the month of September, and yet obviously we have payroll to meet and everything else. So districts that don't have a summer tax collection often have to maintain a much higher fund balance, or they will have to borrow in order to get through that period of time when they're not receiving the state aid payment.
I didn't think we received our state aid payment yet. I thought it comes like middle of November.
We received our first state aid payment October 20th.
Okay, so we just received it.
So our funding got quite low at the beginning of October, and to the point that we received our first payment.
So you got July, August, September, nothing coming in from the state.
Exactly.
So in that case, if we had not done the summer tax levy last year, we would have had to borrow money to pay interest.
That is exactly correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on our agenda is the school closure committee report. Mr. Robert Luther.
Mr. Buer, members of the board, thank you again for allowing me to share an update. We had our second meeting this past Tuesday night of our committee members. And I will say that even after it only being our second meeting, we have, I feel, gained some ground on the understanding of the task that's ahead and our role as a committee. A couple of things that I'd like to share in regards to the meetings and the minutes that were collected. First and foremost, that anybody that's interested in learning the minutes of our meetings, they are listed on the website and they have immediate access to that. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the day after the meeting has,
It has been the day after.
Okay.
We'll try to hold to that.
All right.
But it'll be as soon as we can get them
as
generated.
soon as we can get them generated, okay? The other thing that we agreed upon and has since been put live on the website is our community feedback form. So anybody in the community, a parent, a teacher, a community member that wants to submit some feedback, ask a question, or just give some insight on how they feel that this could go better, we've created a form, it is on the website, that they could fill out and submit, and that will get funneled to the appropriate people in the committee so that we can answer those questions. And then if the person wants to be contacted, we'll contact them and let them know the answers as to when we create an answer for it, okay? So that is live on the website now. The other thing that we talked about was the opportunity to share this information via PTO meeting. And the information that we are gathering as a committee, and what we've decided on, or what we feel would be the best way to do this, is maybe at the school level, the principals will invite folks to come to the PTO meeting, and at that point they can ask questions and submit them through our form on the website, just so that we're getting the same information out at all the different schools and that there's no miscommunication going on, okay? The other thing that I wanted to talk about quickly too was internally as a committee, we've agreed, as opposed to sending emails back and forth and phone calls and everything, we've created a Google document where as a committee we can submit questions to and pull from. So as committee members, we can speak to each other very quickly and we can answer questions and get some resolution when we're not in a committee setting, okay? Let's see, the other thing that we discussed during the meeting, and I think one of the big factors in solving a problem when a committee has been put together to solve a problem is the understanding of what's ahead of us. And so what I felt, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of the entire committee, but for myself personally, the last meeting that we had went over a lot of great information regarding the current status of the buildings that we have here in East China School District, the current state of each of those buildings, and then possible costs if we needed to do some updating. Because as committee members, we're trying to come up with some ideas to give to you as the board. And what we found was the information that was shared, at least for myself, I didn't know a lot of this information, so it was really great to sit down and to hear the different presentations from the members, and a lot of great information was shared. Let's see if there's anything else that I'm missing. I have the Cliff Notes version this evening. I don't have the full. The other thing that we talked about too was, are there any other districts who are feeling the same pain that we're feeling, and how did they handle that situation? And one of the links that were brought to our attention was the Lance Cruz Utilization Committee. So we had anybody in the committee that wanted to see how maybe they handled a similar opportunity, as you want to call it, a similar problem. We can go in and we can read how they addressed it and how they took care of it. We did a lot of talking about building capacities, schools of choice, attendance boundaries, and then we were, and I think this is the most crucial part of every single one of our committee meetings, we then break up into groups and we sit down at a table and we start to discuss and we start to look at the information. As you can see, every week this binder gets a little thicker, and it's chocked full of great information that allows us as a group to sit down and start coming up with some ideas. And so a couple of the ideas that were shared, we talked about moving the 5th grade to middle school. That was talked about quite a bit. We talked about drawing new transportation lines. Again, we have no answers yet, but if a lot of the questions I'm getting from family and community members is, how are you doing with this committee and how are things going? And we don't have any answers yet, but I can tell you that we're discussing a lot of great information, and I feel very confident that everything that's being presented to us, we're utilizing and we're doing our absolute best. So happy to report that things are right on task if there's a task that we can report. So any questions at all?
Yes, Mr. Folsky.
I think the deadline is scheduled roughly in December. A target date for the committee, is that still feasible, or is that going to?
Well, that'll be part of my report.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Skulk. I don't know that I want to answer that question. So.
All right. Should I jump right in?
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Folsky.
Oh, thank you
Very much.
Okay. My report tonight really speaks to what Mr. Luther was saying, in that The information is such, and as you've seen, the task has so many layers. You drop the rock in the pond and it ripples and it touches so many other things. And so when he says no answers yet, that's true. And rather than providing maybe an additional scenario or two to you tonight, what I'm really asking is for the blessing of time. Not time to extend beyond December. We're still using your December regular meeting as a target date for recommendations. But I would like to request tonight that someone on the board makes a motion to cancel the November 10th special meeting, special board meeting, because right now, to be honest, whether it be the committee or the administration, it seems like we're devoting a heck of a lot of time getting ready for meetings rather than doing the work. And we could really use, the committee needs the time to do the work, so in between tonight and your November meeting, there are 2 scheduled meetings for them to do that work. And we believe that given the opportunity to just focus on that rather than just trying to pull together a show or a presentation all the time, we'll have something more substantial for you at your November meeting, November regular meeting, than we could do on short notice at your November special meeting.
Should we still keep our December?
I would. Let's just keep, because if we can give you something really substantial in November, that might say, well, we'll act on it in December, or you might say out of the November meeting, can you give us specifics on point X for that special meeting? So let's not go so far as to cancel that one yet.
Okay.
I make a motion that we would cancel the November 10th special Board of Education meeting that was scheduled.
Support.
Support by Mrs. Murphy. Comments or questions?
I don't know how to put this. Let's see. Well, I guess if we still have
We would still have our
ideas
November-
or questions or whatever, we can ask you
Absolutely.
or Jim.
I'm sure we
Absolutely.
would get
Or the
something in our
committee.
update as to where that
Okay, an
where that
update,
meeting
yeah.
would come from.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Instead of a full out-blown, but just an update
Right.
of what's happening.
Mhm.
That'll be fine. Okay.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So carried.
Thank you.
Item 9, action items. Recommended action. Per administration recommendation, the Board of Education approve the East China School District vision statement to read, "The East China School District will ensure students are college and career ready." That would be as the changed wording that we would have in our vision statement.
Mhm.
Motion is needed.
So moved.
Support.
Moved by Mrs. Frank, supported by Mr. Ridgely. Comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign.
I want to thank you because we've already updated the vision statement out there in the hallway based on your general support of it last month, but we didn't want to hold that off. So, whew, well done, guys. Thank you.
I missed my opportunity. I missed my opportunity and items of interest, and I totally forgot. Got reminded of it with the Bell River one. 2 weeks ago, my son happens to work for the Detroit Red Wings, and he makes school visits to our schools and talks about the importance of staying in school, good education, exercise. And he had the opportunity to go to Palms Elementary, and I was graciously invited to come out and see him do his work. And he has, in 4 years doing this, he has been to over 500 schools. And he said that Palms Elementary School was one of the best schools he's ever done his program at, as far as how well the kids were behaved, how they interacted with them. He was so proud of those kids and the staff that he sent me an email. I passed it on to Principal Mike and to Dr. Skalka, but I just thought the community needed to hear that as well. So congratulations, Principal Mike. And with that, we stand adjourned.